Hola. Hey Flex kids, 8-week kids. This is the part of 1.5 that I wasn't able to teach you because I ran out of time. It's over factoring and a little bit of the square root property, but then we already did all that quadratic formula stuff, so we don't have to do that. So if you remember in class, I kept saying anytime it says factor in the homework, you can actually just do the quadratic formula. So that's what we learned today. So let's go ahead and whip through the quadratic formula. If you are not in an 8-week class, you're watching the wrong video. Please go back to the other homework video that says 1.5. This one is specifically for 8-week class kids. Okay, so instead of factoring 8-week class kids, we're just going to do the quadratic formula. So first, let's figure out what A, B, and C are. A is 1, B is -4, and C is -32. And it's already equal to 0, so that's perfect. And I knew that A was 1 because there was a 1 attached to the x squared. Okay, so now let's throw this in our formula. I'm only going to do a couple of these so that you can just kind of get the point, since we already practiced this in class. Okay, so we're going to have x equals negative parentheses -4 plus or minus square root -4 squared minus 4 times 1 times -32. Oh gosh, I ran out of room. All over 2 times a, 2 times 1. Okay, now in our calculator, we're going to put what's inside the square root. So we're going to put that -4 squared minus 4 times 1 times -32. But I wanted to tell you the difference between all these dashes. This dash in the middle is the minus button, like the button beside the plus sign, minus sign. Okay, but then these other two suckers at the very front and at the very back, that's the negative button. And the negative button is beside the decimal button. So for this first and last sucker, you have to press the negative button down here. If you press the minus, you're not going to get it right. You're not going to get it right, ever. I mean, sometimes. Okay, so let's use this negative button. So first I'm going to do open parentheses, -4, close parentheses, squared, minus button by the 6, 4 times 1 times -32, so negative by the decimal. And I get 144. I think we did this in class maybe. So you get x equals something plus minus square root 144 over something. Well, let's see what those somethings are. At the very front, we had a double -4. That makes a plusative. On the bottom, 2 times 1 is 2. All right, good. Then let's keep going. In class, we would try and break down this square root 144, but I think it's a legit thing. I am 12. Yeah, 12 squared is 144. So let's change this to x equals 4 plus minus just a 12 over 2. And then this splits into two kinds of answers, one with a plus, one with a minus. So I barely have enough room, story of my life. So we're going to write this with a plus sign, 4 plus 12 over 2. And then we're going to write it with a minus sign, 4 minus 12 over 2. And this first sucker, 4 plus 12 is 16. And we're dividing it by 2. So I think that gives you 8. And then on this next sucker, 4 minus 12 is -8 over 2. And that gives you -4. And then I think in your homework, it'll say like some kind of solution set, and it'll have weird squiggles, and you'll just write down these two numbers, 8 and a -4, and put a comma in between. But I think that's how your homework does it. I think the squiggles are already typed. Okay, let's look at part B. We're not actually going to whip out the quadratic formula. I'm just going to show you how we need to start this problem. So on this problem, it's not equal to 0, but I need it to be equal to 0. So I'm going to take this 4x and 21, and I'm going to go ahead and move them because I need this to be equal to 0 before I can even touch the quadratic formula. So let me minus 4x minus 21 minus 4x minus 21. And they cancel on the right. And we get x squared right here, this black x squared, then minus 4x, then minus 21, and then equals 0. And make sure your x squared comes first, then number x, then naked number. Okay, then from here, a is what's on the x squared, 1. B is what's on the x, negative 4. C is what's last, negative 21. And then you do your quadratic formula. Let's see, the only other problem I wanted to show you was maybe a square root property. We went over this in class, but I think we didn't get to this part C. Let's do this part C real quick. I gotta follow SADMAP. So I know you see a +3 and you think that's the addition, but it's not. That +3 is inside these parentheses. So this +3 is in the parentheses, so don't touch it yet. Well, what else could we get away from the x? We could move away this squared, but that's an e exponent. That's last in line also. Well, what the heck is this 3 on the parentheses doing? That 3 at the very beginning of the parentheses is multiplying. And instead of actually multiplying the 3 up in here and doing all that beautiful work, we're trying to get x by itself using opposites. So let's use opposites. The opposite of multiply 3 is divide 3. And on the left, she cancels. That was the whole purpose, was to cancel. So we get x plus 3 in parentheses with a squared equals, on the right side, 36 divided by 3, I think it's 12. Okay, so now if I look at what's left, I have an A addition, but it's in the P parentheses, so I can't touch it, and I have a tiny 2 in the air. Well, let's get rid of that tiny 2. How do we learn how to do that in class? We put a house on it. Okay, let's put a house on it. So when I do, the house and the tiny 2 cancel. That was the whole purpose of putting the house on there, was to cancel that tiny 2. So we get x plus 3 equals the square root of 12. But I don't think the square root of 12 is pretty. Like in class, we had the square root of 4 and the square root of 64, and those were pretty. But this 12 is dirty, so we're going to have to break it. What multiplies to a 12? 6 and a 2. What multiplies to a 6? 3 and a 2. Cross out what has been broken. Goodbye, 6 and 12. Okay, then the pair comes out, 2. The 3 stays in the house, 3. It's equal to x plus 3. Okay, but here's the kicker. Remember on part A when we said the answer was 2 because the square root of 4 is 2? And then we also said the answer was negative 2 because if you square negative 2, because this line says x squared equals 4. If you square negative 2, you get a positive 4, as in there's 2 possibilities that when I square it, I could get a 4. So I'd account for those 2 possibilities by putting a positive 2 and a minus 2. In part B, when I square rooted, I'd account for the 2 possibilities of a positive 8i and a negative 8i. Here, when I square root, I have to take into account all the possibilities of a positive 2 square root of 3 or a minus 2 square root of 3. Watch what I just did. So instead of saying like 2 comma negative 2, another way to say that is just plus or minus 2. But I don't think your homework has that symbol. I can't remember. So here, another way of saying 2 square root of 3 and the negative 2 square root of 3 is to say plus or minus. And then finish it. Subtract 3. And we get x equals negative 3 plus minus 2 square root 3. And this looks kind of weird. And you're right, it does look weird. But remember, Remember when we were doing those eyes, we put the pretty part at the beginning and the dirty part at the end? Same thing here. We're gonna put this nice, pretty -3 at the front, and then the stuff with the square root at the back end. Okay, and then your homework might have you go a step further and say this is -3 plus 2 square root 3, comma, it's also -3 with a minus 2 square root 3. Your homework might say that. You need to check your view and example to see exactly what they want. Okay, so let's do maybe one more. No, I think that's all for now. Actually, let's do one more quadratic formula. Okay, so let's do one more quadratic formula. No, actually we're not. Okay, so this is it. So this is all that you missed from 1.5 because our class wasn't long enough.